What's up, nerds? It's Shane and David from Guys at Magic. We've got a new deck upgrade for you. David's put together the Urza's Iron Alliance. We gave him some Monopoly money. He's made an upgrade for us. It's going to be pretty sweet. So without further ado, Dave, would you like to just talk a little bit about the Face Commander and what's your game plan?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So the whole point of this deck is going to be revolving around Urza, Chief Artificer. This is 3, a white, a blue, and a black for a total of 6 mana. He is a legendary creature human artificer. It's a 4/5, and it says it has affinity for artifact creatures. Artifact creatures you control have menace, and at the beginning of your end step, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So the way that this deck is going to work is essentially we are going to aim to make sure that we get our commander Urza out in play as soon as we possibly can. Make sure that we're going to start pumping out plenty of those constructs, and then hopefully our game plan here is really just kind of beat our opponents to death with those massive creatures. Urza allows himself to come out really cheap because he has affinity for artifact creatures. So if we have a couple of them in play, they kind of actually pseudo ramp him to allow us to be able to cast him earlier than turn 6. In addition to that, those constructs, he's going to make a new one at the beginning of each of your end steps. So the really cool thing is there's not like a legendary creature catch or anything like that that you need to worry about. He's just going to continue to produce them over and over and over again. And they actually count not only themselves, but they'll also count each other to kind of like pump each other up too. So they get really, really big really, really quickly.
Damn. So it's almost like you're going wide, but you're going tall and wide. And they have
Yeah,
minutes.
yes, and that's the other really cool thing too, is like they're going to be really big threats, and your opponents are probably going to have to double block or deal with Urza. But because he has affinity for artifact creatures, it shouldn't be too much of a problem for you to be able to recast him.
That's rad, dude. All right, well, you've already got me excited. Want to jump into some of the cards you added?
Yeah, no problem. So the first group of cards that I really wanted to include in here are basically just going to be ramp pieces. I love the fact that Urza has affinity for artifact creatures, so I wanted to include a ramp package that was focused around artifact creatures. The first one that I want to talk about is Ornithopter of Paradise. This is 2 mana for a 0/2. It's an artifact creature Thopter. It has flying, and you can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So long as this thing is in play, Urza is going to cost 1 less, and then this actually can tap to produce an additional color to help get Urza out even faster. So just by having this card out alone, you can get Urza out on turn 4 instead of having to wait around until turn 6. So really impactful creature. Similarly, we are also going to be playing with Silver Mirror, Leaden Mirror, and Gold Mirror. They're all 2 mana 1/1s, and each one of them can tap to add either a blue, a black, or a white to your mana pool, respectively. We'll go ahead and throw those up on the board. They're part of a cycle. There's 5 of them in total, but obviously, due to the color constraints on this deck, we can only include 3. But all 3 of these are fantastic includes. They're going to be able to make sure that Urza comes out earlier, more consistent, and then plus, they help us ramp.
They help you ramp twice almost, dude. Affinity for artifacts and they produce color. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, what do you got in the artifact creatures? We saw a couple. Got anything else?
So the deck is already loaded with a ton of artifact creatures. There are a couple more that I did want to include in this deck. These are just going to be a little bit more on like the utility side. So the first one here is Esper Sentinel. If you're not familiar with this card, it's quickly becoming one of the best white draw engines in EDH. It's a single white mana for an artifact creature human soldier. It's a 1/1, and it says whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player plays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. There's not a ton of ways in this deck to be able to get Esper Sentinel to be large, but even if you're just taxing them for 1, you're bound to be able to get some card draw off this. Aether Sworn Canonist is 1 and a white for an artifact creature human cleric. It's a 2/2, and it says each player who casts a non-artifact spell this turn can't cast additional non-artifact spells. This, for the most part, is probably just going to limit our opponents. We do have, obviously, some non-artifact spells in our deck as well, but the majority of our deck is going to be feeding into this strategy, so this probably won't really hurt us, but has the potential to really stifle our opponents. Plus, it's a low-to-the-ground artifact creature, which is dope because Urza loves those.
That's super mean, dude.
We have Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. He is 1, a blue, and a black for a legendary artifact creature human. He's a 2/2 with Death Touch, and he says whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you can choose a target artifact card from your graveyard, and you may cast that card this turn. So he allows us to get a little bit of extra recursion specifically for our artifacts. And then lastly, we have Shimmer Mirror in this package. It's 3 mana for an artifact creature mirror. It's a 2/2 with flash, and it says that you may cast artifact spells as though they had flash, which is about half the deck. So really helps us be able to kind of play around with our opponents, potentially dodge some of our opponent's counter spells or removal. Really powerful card.
Damn, dude, your entire deck just turns into a instance. Let's go.
Not the whole thing, but a lot of it.
Well, a good portion, you're right. Well, do you have any non-artifact creatures, or what do we got going on?
We do have two creatures that we're going to be including in the deck that I thought were just really important. Both of these cards are fantastic includes. Sadly, neither one of them are an artifact in themselves. The first one is Rebek, Architect of Ascension. This is 3 and a white for a legendary creature, Human Artificer. It's a 3/4, and it says artifacts you control have protection from each converted mana cost among artifacts you control. So if we control a 1 mana artifact, our artifacts have protection from 1 mana spells, which is going to be huge. This helps to set it up to where not only are our creatures just going to be big and smashy, but also hopefully very difficult to kill.
Wow.
Padim, Consul of Innovation, is going to help us out here as well. He is 3 and a blue for a 1/4 legendary creature, Vidalcan Artificer. It says artifacts you control have hexproof. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost or tied for the highest converted mana cost, draw a card. Hopefully, we should still be able to trigger that. Now, sadly, Urza's constructs that he makes don't have a mana value since they're just tokens. But I mean, we're still running plenty of other support artifacts in this deck.
Yeah, and all our artifacts now have hexproof and or with the other card, protection from a converted mana cost. That's pretty nuts.
Yeah, not bad whenever you're able to protect your big smashy menacey things.
Yeah, I would say so. So what are we looking at for any kind of artifacts that might not be creatures? What do we got going on?
So I'm going to just be throwing 3 into this deck. The general idea here is I wanted us to be able to also make some tokens in this deck, something that will allow us to go a little bit more on the wide side. Plus, if we are going a little bit more wide, it's going to help us out with those constructs, make sure that those are nice and big and beefy. So not necessarily a combo per se, but the next 2 cards that I'm going to talk about do have a lot of synergy with each other and are probably pretty well known within the EDH community. The first one here is Sword of the Meek. This is 2 mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +1/+2, and it has an equip cost of 2. It also says whenever a 1/1 creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Sword of the Meek from your graveyard to the battlefield, then attach it to that creature. Now, Sword of the Meek on its own is really not that impressive of a card. For the most part, you're probably not going to be taking advantage of it being able to bounce itself back from the graveyard to the battlefield, because generally it's not really going to have a whole lot of targets. In addition, being able to give one of your creatures +1/+2 is not necessarily the biggest effect in the game, but on its own, it still does provide some value. The card that this really wants to see play with is Thopter Foundry. This is a white or a black and a blue mana for a total of 2. It's an artifact, and it says you can pay 1 to sacrifice a non-token artifact, create a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying. You gain 1 life. So the reason why these cards really synergize with each other is because with Thopter Foundry, you can pay 1 mana to sacrifice Sword of the Meek, which will create a 1/1 blue Thopter, which will grab Sword of the Meek from the graveyard, put it into play. And this, so long as you have extra mana, you can continue to repeat this and just dump your mana to make those Thopters.
Yeah, that's a really fun little combo. I like it.
I don't necessarily want to call it a combo because it's not just going to win you the game or anything. But I mean, it does provide you with a little bit of extra flexibility, a go wide strategy. Plus, Thopter Foundry on its own, if our opponents are looking to, I don't know, kill off one of our things, we could potentially, assuming that it's non-token, of course, sacrifice it to get some kind of value out of it.
Yeah, doesn't seem, and it's not really probably going to be infinite. You don't really have infinite mana.
No, there's no way in this deck for you to go infinite with this. I just wanted to include these because I felt like, generally speaking, I mean, the synergy is really powerful. And if you are able to make, I don't know, 4 or 5 maybe extra Thopters a turn using these kinds of abilities, that means that your constructs are also going to get 4 or 5 added toughness and power a turn.
The synergy is amazing.
The last one here is Mystic Forge. This is 4 mana for an artifact. It says you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact card or colorless non-land card, and you can tap it, pay 1 life, and exile the top card of your library. Mystic Forge is going to provide us with a lot of extra card advantage in this game. We don't have to have a whole lot of cards in our hand if we can just play off the top of our deck. And seeing as how the majority of our deck are artifacts, this allows us to hit more often than not. And if the case that we maybe run across a land or a card that we don't want to see, we can always tap this, pay the 1 life, and exile the top card of our library to hopefully continue chaining.
Yeah, it seems like a very strong card for your deck, man. So what else we got in the includes?
So there are 2 cards that just have so much potential value in this deck. They are from the Warhammer 40k deck, so I know that for some people that might be a little bit taboo. However, I believe it was the Necrons deck included both of these, and they just work really, really well here. The first one here is Biotransference. This is 2 and 2 black for a total of 4 mana. It's an enchantment. It says creatures you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you lose 1 life and create a 2/2 black Necron warrior artifact creature token. So it provides us with some token generation. It also turns all of our things into artifacts, even our commander, which is really, really powerful.
Oh yeah, dude.
The next card that I want to include in here is Their Name is Death. This is 3 and 3 black for a total of 6 mana. It's a sorcery that says destroy all non-artifact creatures. Because the majority of our creatures are going to be artifacts, or if we have biotransference in play, all of our creatures would be artifacts. This essentially turns into a board wipe that really doesn't affect us.
Yeah, I would say one-sided board wipes. Pretty good, man. Pretty good.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah. All right. Well, what do we got for instant sorceries coming in?
So only 2 in total. The deck actually has a pretty solid removal package already built into it, but we're playing in white, so I can't not include Path to Exile. For a single white mana, you get an instant. It says exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This is probably just the best removal spell in EDH. We also are going to include Fabricate in this list. This is 2 and a blue for a total of 3 mana. It's a sorcery. It says search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. So we are running a tutor in here. This isn't going to go find like a combo piece or anything like that, but what it will help us to go do is to find any of those artifacts that we think are going to be able to help push us or push our board state, or potentially help us just kind of, I don't know, level the game out in the case that we need to.
Makes sense to me, man. Do we have any more enchantments coming in?
We do have 2 more enchantments coming in. The first one here is Efficient Construction. This is 3 and a blue for an enchantment. It says whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So an additional token producer for us. That is really nice because all we have to do is play the things that we already want to cast. The next one is Mechanized Production. This is 2 and 2 blue for a total of 4 mana. It's an enchantment aura. It says enchant artifact you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of the enchanted artifact, and if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, you win the game. So this helps us to not only produce additional tokens, possibly even more constructs per turn, but it has an alternative win condition stapled onto this as well.
Okay, this is pretty dumb then. So your commander just makes 8 tokens and then you win the game.
If we have mechanized production in play and we have 8 of the constructs in play, then yes, we would win the game.
That sounds stupid.
I mean, in all actuality, though, if we have 8 constructs in play, that means we have 8 at minimum 8 eights, so we probably have already won the game.
Okay, I guess that's true. This is just a way to win the game without attacking.
It's actually in here. If you want to push for the alternative win condition, you would name Thopter and make a token copy of the Thopters because there's ways that you can quickly hit 8 or more for Thopters.
That is true, actually. Okay, cool. I like that. Both of those includes seem really good, my dude. What else? What do we have that's coming in that's really good?
So we're going to be throwing a single Planeswalker into this list. This card is just too good for us to pass up. It's going to be Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. It's 4, a black, and a blue for a total of 6 mana. A legendary Planeswalker Tezzeret comes in with 5 loyalty. It has a passive ability on it that says creature and Planeswalker spells you cast have affinity for artifacts. So just off the bat, having this thing in play probably means the majority of our spells really just cost whatever the color of the pip is in their mana cost.
Wow.
He's got a +2 that says Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control. You gain X life. So that ability, it's very easy for us to have a ton of artifacts in play. I mean, like whenever I say a ton, I'm talking like 10 or more. So having the ability to deal 10 damage and gain 10 life on a plus ability on a Planeswalker is huge. This is a card that your opponents are going to have to deal with immediately. And because he ramps up by 2, he's pretty big. He's also got a -3 of return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, which is always nice to have that recursion. And his ultimate is at -8 that says exile the top 10 cards of your library, put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield. Because the majority of our deck are artifacts, we're probably not going to whiff on that.
That's nuts. That plus is nuts too, dude. Jeez.
Oh yeah, the plus is really powerful.
Yeah, I can see that being very annoying in the game. Well, the list looks amazing. Did you do any tweaking to the lands at all?
I did. So I did want to throw in a couple lands here. I threw in all 3 of the check lands that work for this color. That's Drowned Catacomb, Isolated Chapel, and Glacial Fortress. The way that these work is they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 1 or more of the basic land types that they care about. Drowned Catacomb cares about an island or swamp and can tap for either a blue or a black. Isolated Chapel cares about either a plains or a swamp and can tap for a white or a black. And Glacial Fortress cares about either a plains or an island and can tap for a white or a blue. To wrap this all up, the most interesting card in the deck, of course, we're going to also be adding in 1 swamp.
Holy moly, we did it. We broke the deck.
We did. Turns out swamp's good.
Well, all right, man. I think this deck looks mean. I think I'm not going to enjoy playing against it. But you did add a bunch of cards. Now we got to talk about the cards you're going to be removing to add all those good cards. So I guess you start taking that away.
Yeah. So our first little group of cards here are just really, really, really expensive. I'm not a big fan of like 6 or more mana spells. I generally would like to be casting 2 or 3 little things per turn and accumulating value rather than hoping that I can cast one big thing and not get it countered. So the first card we're going to take out is Angel of the Ruins. This is 5 and 2 white, a total of 7 mana. It's an artifact creature angel. It's a 5/7 with flying, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, exile up to 2 artifacts and or enchantments. It also has plane cycling for 2 mana. This card coming in at 7 mana is just too expensive. It is an artifact creature, which is a plus, but Urza probably doesn't care about the affinity for this thing because he's probably in play well before this gets dropped. And although the removal here is powerful, I'm just not here for my removal being stapled onto a card that I probably won't be able to cast the majority of the game. Hexivus is 6 mana for an artifact creature construct. It's a 0/0, but it says it has flying in it and enters the battlefield with 6+1/+1 counters on it. You can pay 1 mana and remove a +1/+1 counter on it to put a flying counter on another target creature. You can also pay 1 and remove a counter from another creature you control to put a +1/+1 counter on Hexivus. This is a way for you to be able to distribute some counters, make sure that you get that flying to those constructs. However, Urza already gives them Menace, which for the most part, is probably going to be enough evasion for them to be able to start swinging in and causing havoc. Sharding Sphinx, not to be confused with Sharting Sphinx,
Okay.
is 4 and 2 blue for a total of 6 mana. It's an artifact creature Sphinx. It's a 4/4 with flying. It says whenever an artifact creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying. This card can get out of control very quickly. If you attack with 4 Thopters, you'll have 4 instances of this ability triggering, assuming that they've dealt that combat damage, which will also then net you 4 Thopters. So this card is definitely powerful. I did need to just kind of make a couple more cuts to this deck, and at 6 mana, this happened to be one of them.
I feel that, man. I feel it.
Although not necessarily a really expensive card in this deck, it does have a very high mana value. I also got rid of Thought Monitor. It is 6 and a blue, a total of 7 mana. It's a 2/2 artifact creature construct. It has affinity for artifacts, so you're never actually going to pay 7 mana for it. It says it has flying, and then whenever it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards. It is card draw that is somewhat situational. You still have to be able to turn this on. And because of the inconsistencies, sometimes this could cost you 3 mana, sometimes it could cost you 1 mana, sometimes it'll still cost you like 5 or 6. I just don't like that. And although, yeah, it's a cool card, and it does work in this deck, I chose to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Thanos Solemn Survivor is 2 and a blue for a legendary creature human artificer. It's a 1/3. It also says that you can pay 2 mana and tap it to create a token that's a copy of up to one target artifact token you control, mill 2 cards. So keep in mind here, you can only target an artifact token. So for this deck, probably going to limit you to Thopters and Constructs. He has a second ability on there where you can pay 1, a white, a blue, and a black to tap it, sacrifice 2 artifact tokens, and exile an artifact or creature card from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of the exiled card, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types, and activate only as a sorcery. I feel really bad for cutting Thanos in an Urza deck, but this guy is incredibly slow and very mana intensive. He also really doesn't do a whole lot for the deck. So Thanos, sorry to say it, is getting cut from Urza.
Gotta go, man.
We're also going to be removing Wreck Hunter. This is 2 black mana for a creature human artificer. It's a 2/2 with flash, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, choose target opponent. You create a tapped Power Stone token for each non-land card in that player's graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn. I'm not the biggest fan of Power Stone tokens. I also really don't like how it has that this turn clause on it. This is going to make this a very situational card. And although it does have flash that you could potentially bring this in after your opponents have cast a board wipe, I just don't want this sitting around in my hand to potentially have little to no effect on the game. The other thing here being is just as a reminder, those Power Stones, not only do they come in tapped, they can only be used to activate the abilities or to pay for mana for casting artifact spells. So a little bit of a restriction, not the biggest one for this deck, but still not really something I wanted to work with.
Yeah, dude, cut Hunter out of there.
A couple of other cards that got the cut. We have a few more creatures. The first one here is Wire Surgeons. This is 4 and 2 black. It's a creature human artificer. It's a 6/5 with fear and says each artifact creature card in your graveyard has Encore. Its Encore cost is equal to its mana cost. I'm not really here for it. It's very expensive, and although giving your artifacts that recursion ability, that Encore, is nice, I just felt like this deck really didn't need this. I'm trying to win with artifact tokens that I'm not going to be able to recur. Scholar of New Horizons is 1 and a white for a creature human scout. It's a 1/1 and it says whenever it enters a battlefield, it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. You can also tap it and remove a counter from a permanent you control. Search your library for a plains card and reveal it. If an opponent controls more lands than you can put the land onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, you put it into your hand and then shuffle. Wizards of the Coast, I feel like, comes out with a new version of this card for white precons every single year. And I feel like, for the most part, we've never actually gotten one that I've wanted to play or been really all that happy about. Sure, you can do this ability repeatedly, so you can go and fetch every single turn if you would like to. But that's also going to assume that you do have those counters for you to be able to take away. And this deck actually doesn't really do a great job of putting counters on things. So he is somewhat limited.
Get him out of here, dude.
We have Filigree Attendant. This is 2 and 2 blue. It's an artifact creature homunculus. It's a *3 with flying, and it says that its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. This kind of does the exact same thing that our constructs do. My only gripe with this is that it has 3 toughness, and that's not going to grow. So my thing here being is, yes, it could be really big on the front half, but ultimately it's still going to die to most blockers. The last 2 creatures to get the cut, the first one here is Alila Artful Provocateur. This is 1, a white, a blue, and a black for a legendary creature fairy warlock. She's a 2/3 with flying, death touch, and lifelink. It says that other creatures you control with flying get +1/+0. And whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment spell, you create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. I love the fact that she's a payoff for casting a lot of artifacts, but the tokens that she produces aren't artifacts. If they were, I probably would have kept her in the deck. We're not really doing a whole lot of pumping there with her first ability. And because she's not an artifact herself, I just felt like, we needed to make some room, and she was on the chopping block. The last creature we're going to talk about is Chrome Courier. This is 1, a white, and a blue. It's an artifact creature Thopter. It's a 1/1 with flying. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. If you put an artifact card into your hand this way, you gain 3 life. We don't have a way really to abuse this or to flicker this thing, so I'm not really here for it.
Makes sense to me, dude. All right, well, those are all the creatures and other things you got out of there. Did you get rid of any sorcery and instants, anything like that?
Yeah, we definitely did. This deck is obviously it's a precon and it's built like a precon. There are 3 board wipes that come preloaded into this deck, and we added one more. I don't need 4 board wipes in a deck. In fact, really, I feel like the perfect number is kind of just 2. So we are going to be removing 2 of them. The first one here is Urza's Ruinous Blast. This is 4 and a white for a legendary sorcery. As a reminder, you can only cast legendary sorceries if you control a legendary creature or a planeswalker. It says exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. It does exile, which is really cool. I kind of hate this card though because it probably is not going to hurt your opponents as much as what you need for a board wipe to do, because their legendary things are going to dodge this. Phyrexian Rebirth is also getting the cut here. This is 4 and 2 white for a sorcery. It says destroy all creatures, and you create an XX colorless horror artifact creature token, where X is the number of creatures destroyed this way. So it's a board wipe that does leave you with a big thing, but I felt like, let's add in the board wipe that keeps all of your things instead. We're also going to be removing Preordain. This is a single blue mana for a sorcery. It says scry 2, then draw a card. Preordain is a card that I actually really love, but we had to make some cuts. The deck actually does have a fairly decent draw package, especially with the cards that we've included in here as well. So Preordain is going to be removed.
Yeah, makes sense to me, man.
Wrapping up the rest of the instants and sorceries, we have 2 more. The first one here is Sphinx's Revelation. This is X, a white, and 2 blue. It's an instant. It says you gain X life and draw X cards. I have tried to make this card work so many times in EDH, and it sounds like an incredibly powerful effect. My gripe with this card is that you need an absolutely ludicrous amount of mana to be able to make this thing worth it. And I've often felt like if you have enough mana to make this thing worth it, you probably have enough mana to make something even more powerful happen. Your draw engines and your draw cards shouldn't cost $1 million, and Sphinx's Revelation kind of does. So we are going to be cutting it. I mean, to put things into perspective, if you pay 4 mana, you draw 1 card and gain 1 life.
Yeah, they definitely want you to pump a bunch of mana into this one.
A card that I really didn't want to cut from this list is D-Spark. This is a white and a black, so a total of 2 mana. It's an instant. It says exile target permanent with mana value 4 or greater. I actually really do like D-Spark. Ultimately, I got down to the point where we did need to make a cut, and sadly, this was just on the chopping block. We did add in that Path to Exile, which in many cases I do feel like is kind of just a better card. D-Spark can hit any permanent, but it does have that mana value restriction. And I have noticed in a lot of games that I've wanted to play this card, that mana value restriction can really be punishing.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. So do you have anything else that you needed to cut?
Yeah, we went ahead and removed 3 artifacts from our artifact deck. The first one here is Liquid Metal Torque. This is 2 mana for an artifact. You can tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool. You can also tap it and have target non-land permanent become an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. This is in here because it is an artifact that provides ramp, and it has an ability on here that I guess sometimes can be relevant or impactful. I just felt like most of the time this is not doing anything for me aside from just tapping for 1 mana. And there are better things that I could probably be including in the deck. This is going to take up a slot in the 99. So Liquid Metal Torque is getting the axe. Relic of Progenitus is in here as just kind of a card that I looked at and thought, wow, this is a flagship. Go play up against the Mishra deck and hope you find this card to shut off their graveyard. For a single mana, you get an artifact. You can tap it and have target player exile a card from his or her graveyard, or you can pay 1 mana and exile the relic and then exile all cards from all graveyards to draw a card, so it does cantrip. This is really great if you're playing up against a bunch of graveyard heavy decks, or if you're anticipating that. It's just, as a card in and of itself, this is taking a slot in the 99, and although it would make for an excellent sideboard piece, we don't play with a sideboard in EDH. Lastly here, we have Kayla's Music Box. This is 2 mana for a legendary artifact. You can pay a white, you can tap it, and look at the top card of your library, then exile it face down. You can tap it, and until end of turn, you may play cards you owned exiled with Kayla's Music Box. This is a pseudo draw engine draw-y thing. It's really weird And although I, on paper, liked this card, the more I play tested this deck, the more I realized Kayla's Music Box is unbearably slow. Um, you have to tap it twice in order to be able to just get one card back. So unless there's a way for you to be able to repeatedly untap this thing, I just don't really see how you're going to accrue a whole lot of value here. Especially considering your opponents, all they have to do is blow this up, and then you've wasted a ton of turns, a bunch of mana tapping this thing. And all you've done really is exile your cards.
Yeah, I can see why that would get the cut, man. It's value, but it's a very, very slow value. Well, all right. You mentioned that you added some new lands. Did you have to cut any lands to make room for those?
We did. There's going to be 5 lands that are going to be getting the cut, and I know that we only added 4, so we are dropping the land count by 1. We are going to be removing all 3 of these bounce lands. The first one here is Azorius Chancery. This is a land that says it enters the battlefield tapped, and whenever it enters the battlefield, you have to return another land you control to its owner's hand. Later on, you can tap to add both a white and a blue. So they do tap for 2. They're cool in that regard. My gripe with this card, though, is that this isn't a graveyard deck. This isn't a deck where we want to intentionally be throwing things into the yard by maybe overextending on our hand size. I don't like these cards unless you're playing with that kind of recursion. So Azorius Chancery, Dimir Aqueduct, and Orzhov Basilica are all going to be removed here, and they all do the exact same thing. They just tap for 2 different colors of mana. They're all part of the same cycle. I'm also not the biggest fan of Ash Barrens. I know that there are a lot of people who really like this card. Ash Barrens is a land that you can tap to add a colorless mana to your mana pool. It does have basic land cycling where you can pay 1 and then you can go search your library for that basic land, put it into your hand. So there is a use for it. I would just prefer to draw that basic land instead. So I'm not the biggest fan of Ash Barrens. It's typically one of the first cards that I cut out of decks.
Yeah, same with
And
you.
And then, of course, the last land that I wanted to get the axe is Sky Cloud Expanse. This is one of my least favorite cycles of lands, or just like one of my least favorite lands in general. You can pay 1 mana to tap it and add both a white and a blue. The reason why I don't like this card is because if you don't have another land, this doesn't produce mana.
Yeah, I hate that
So
too.
So yeah, this makes for an absolutely awful card in your opening hand. It's fine later on in the game because it does technically net you that 1 mana back that you had to pay into it, but I don't want this in my opening hand. So all 5 of these lands have been removed.
What does that bring your land count to?
So all in all, that is going to bring our land count from 36 down to 35. This deck, however, I feel operates just fine at 35 lands.
Yeah, I could see. I always hover around 36, 35, so that sounds good.
Yep. We have removed a couple of our more expensive cards as well, so our mana value on average has dropped a little bit. And just from playtesting, I haven't had any issues where I've noticed I'm stalling out and not drawing the lands that I need.
Perfect, dude. Well, I like what you've done with the deck. We said in the beginning that we were doing this for $100. So what is the total that this upgrade came to?
This upgrade is actually a little bit on the cheaper side. I spent $92 of that 100, so there's a little bit of wiggle room. If there is another card maybe that caught your eye, something else that you wanted to throw in here for that extra $8, by all means go for it. I know that there were a couple of cards that I definitely wanted to include from the Brothers War set that just because the set's not out yet, it's kind of difficult to get a gauge on how expensive some of those cards are. So maybe that opens up a little bit of room there to pick up some of those, throw those in the deck as well.
Yeah, dude, these prices can be kind of nuts. So I could see where you're coming from. Well, cool, man. Do you have any other closing statements for this deck?
Nope. Get Urza out as quickly as possible, make constructs, and go smash.
I like how you say nope, and then you start to say something. Love it, David.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, good deck. Always, check down in the description below. You'll find David's deck list. Yeah, and don't forget to leave us a comment, letting us know what you think of the upgrade. Maybe ask David why he didn't add this card, or David loves answering questions, don't you, David?
I love questions. I hate
Well,
questions.
but no, yeah, leave us a comment letting us know what you like or what you think of the build. As always, subscribe to Guys of Magic. Make sure you can stay up to date on all of our updates. all of our deck techs, all of our spoilers, just everything cool about Guys of Magic. Also, don't forget to follow us on our Instagram and our Twitter and our TikTok. It's all just at Guys at Magic. And we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Later.